Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode of the Shredding Skeptic. Today we're going to be reviewing the happiness hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, and we're also going to be taking a look at the newly released Project Cars downloadable content and some of the classic racetracks. So strap yourselves in and let's take a look, shall we? Alright, so let's jump right into the old Hockenheim racetrack in our Lotus Type 49C Cosworth, and let's dive right into the happiness hypothesis. So, as usual, we're going to have to get off the line pretty quickly so that we can dive into our topic without too much interference. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to come out to the Hockenheim Classic racetrack in this new expansion for Project Cars is the author does make a lot of use of metaphor in his book, where he talks about how in today's day and age where we drive a lot of cars, we're kind of used to this idea of, you just point it in a direction and it goes there, and if it doesn't, well, I guess you made the mistake, which I suppose does have quite a lot of truth to it. Now, on the other hand, the way we used to get around using animals for locomotion instead, seems like this animal's right on my tail right now, so I'm going to have to put a little bit of distance between he and I. Now, like I was saying, back in the day we used to use animals for locomotion, so the idea was if the animal was trained well enough, I suppose you could get it to go forward, back, left, right, whatever, you needed the animal to do, but oftentimes it wouldn't. Animals kind of have a mind of their own. And in the same way, the author uses this metaphor of the rider and the elephant. Now, this is to represent the dichotomous nature of our divided selves, and I suppose the way we could all relate to this is sometimes, despite our best efforts, we may engage in behaviors that aren't necessarily in the best interests of our long-term survival. Now, this is probably, reasonably unique to mammalian species that, we just like to have fun sometimes at the expense of our long-term survival, and that's, fairly normal for people. So the way the author, I guess, reconciles this is by sort of showing how we're really the conscious versions of this rider and elephant, and the elephant is sort of that unconscious part of our nature that doesn't always act in our best interests, and he talks about things like, the hidden thoughts you might have every now and then, like maybe just blurting out something really stupid at the worst possible time, or, if you were looking off, at the ledge of the Grand Canyon, that part of you that just thinks, man, I wonder if I could just jump. And then it just kind of goes away, but you always kind of remember it, and it bothers you kind of, because it, it feels kind of unnatural. Like, what is it about this, curious nature of my personality that's so potentially dangerous, right? So, the author goes on to talk about how, over time, the human brain has evolved from smaller structures that served a much more immediately relevant purpose, like encoding memory or, creating a fear response to facilitate the next mechanism that kind of grew over time, this approach or avoid. Now, while you guys would probably recognize this idea as, there are certain things that you find in your environments that you're like, yeah, I want to kind of investigate more of that, I want to check that out, I want to approach that, right? But then there are sometimes you have the exact opposite response where you're like, I think I want to just avoid that. So this is a mechanism that's evolved over many years as somewhat of a defense mechanism, right? Because if we didn't, well, I suppose many of us, going back tens of thousands of years, didn't, and those who didn't would not have survived long enough to pass on their genes. So those who did would have promoted this sort of behavior down the line because, again, it's a survival response. Those who didn't have it, well, I suppose they just didn't make the Darwinian grade, so to speak. Now, I'd like to talk also briefly just about the difference between Type 1 and Type 2 errors. And an error I suppose I could be making right now in the midst of this race is getting the two of them backwards, but the idea, if I'm getting this right, is the Type 2 error is basically assuming something to be false when in fact it's true. Type 1, I think, is the exact opposite, where you assume something to be true when in fact it's false. Now, these obviously come at, different costs, right? Like if, you go all the way back to the time where, the early hominid is hunting in the woods and he hears a rustling behind him. Now, he could definitely assume that is a, just the wind rustling the leaves, or he could assume that it's a saber-toothed tiger. Now, if he's wrong about the wind, it could cost him his life, right? But if he's wrong about the saber-toothed tiger, well, he might just have to, recover a bit of energy later by running or whatever. But, the idea is that humans have this negativity bias where we're much more inclined to see the negative in things because it serves a survival purpose, right? The cost of missing an opportunity is much less than the cost of missing an opportunity to perhaps save your own life. So that's why, despite the media encouraging it, we do tend to be predisposed to be more interested in a lot more of the negative things that happen in our environment because there's something about it that just grasps our attention. And I think a lot of that just comes from that, idea that we need to survive, so things that, I guess, went against the survival of other people probably have more of a potential learning value for us because, that's something that, it's a mistake we could learn from that might later save our lives. So that's, partly the reason why we're so predisposed to the negative. What can we do about this? The author does have a few different ideas about how we can go about correcting this, and I guess one of the things that people would want to think about first and foremost when it comes to treating this unhappiness would be the pharmaceutical approach. Now, the author doesn't disagree, and I guess, neither do I really, that pharmaceuticals do have a place, I suppose, if you're in a position that, I guess, you can't even get out of bed. Like, you are hurting so bad that you can't even function. At that point, medication might be a good step in order to get you back on your feet, in order to take the steps necessary to go through some of the other transformative processes that might help you down the road. The author makes mention of meditation, which would be just a process by which, you shut off all the distractions and basically just focus on how it is you feel. And what the benefit of this is it'll help teach you about what it is you need. Because really, you're the only one that can answer that question. And another option might be cognitive behavioral therapy, which we're going to talk about in another episode. So thanks for tuning into this episode of The Shredding Skeptic, and definitely check out the Happiness Hypothesis. I'll leave a link in the description. See you next time.